The territory of Alaska, the land of the totem, the land where hundreds of square miles have yet to feel the tread of white man's feet, a land with a fabulous yet chaotic past, with a promising, brilliant future, attracting all in whom the pioneer spirit still prevails.
In 1949, my father went to work for a company called Drake Puget Sound, building 500-man barracks in Elmendorf at Anchorage. And so he enjoyed it so much that the next spring he decided to move up there. So we had an old Nash Rambler or Nash car of some kind, as well as rounded jobs. And he bought a trailer, about a 16, 18-foot trailer, hooked on the back of it, and away we went from Canoga Park, California to Anchorage. And we drove up over the Alcan Highway, which at that time wasn't really completed. It wasn't paved at all, it was all gravel. It had a lot of permafrost spots that were bogs where they'd have to hook 4, 5, 6 of us all together and drag us through with a cat. And our equipment would just slide on top of that mud and stuff. We'd get on the other side, we'd go for a while, we'd run into another one of these. So it took us quite a while to get up there, but we got up to Anchorage.
My, that's quite a city, isn't it?
That's Anchorage, the Chicago of the North, a center of defense, industry, mining, and agriculture.
We went outside of town out of the main part of town, we were about 3 or 4 miles outside in a little town called Spenard. And there was a little grocery store, a gas station, and that was about all that was around there. And they had a trailer park across from it. So we parked our trailer there, and that's where we lived for a while. My dad went looking for a job and also looking for someplace to live. So he worked in construction there, and then on the weekends he looked for a place to live, and we found a place out in Spenard. And we moved into that. It was it's just a big square box is all it was. And so we lived in that and we worked on it. And we lived there in Spenard there for quite a while, all through my high school. Well, I don't know, from then on, I just started working with my dad, building a house, redoing ours. So finally got smart and got myself a couple of jobs while I was going to high school, because I figured I was going to work anyway, and I was working for him for nothing, so I better get a job where I could make some money. So that's what I did, I worked. Called the Milky Way. It was a little milk bar, and I cleaned that in the morning, went to high school, and in the afternoon I worked for a company called Arrowhead Souvenirs. And at Arrowhead Souvenirs, we packed and shipped souvenirs all over Alaska, all the trinkets and all that kind of stuff. Senior year, I went to work for Pacific Northern Airlines, and I worked on the ramp crew, loading and unloading airplanes. And so our schooling started at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I was through by 1 o'clock. And so at 1 o'clock I'd go to work at P&A, and I'd work there for a full shift till that evening. So I did that in my senior high school. There was a program through the school where they gave you credit for it by working like that, so I got extra credit for that. Well, I did that up until I graduated from high school, and then at P&A, I became friends with a radio man. He did the radio work on it. And he and I used to talk a lot, and he wanted to go prospecting. So he kept telling me about that, and finally he got it all arranged where he was going to go. He asked me if I wanted to go. I said, sure. So we both quit our jobs and we went prospecting up in the Wrangell Mountains. So we did that for that whole summer. And then after that summer of doing that, I went down to Bremerton, Washington, and went to college for a short stint. And then I came back and worked in construction again. My folks moved to Chico, California, so I moved down there. I was going to go to school at Chico State. So I spent, I don't know, most of the winter down there. And then I decided not to go, so I went back to Alaska and went back to work. And I worked that summer out in Cape Romanzoff, which is a dew line project. And it was very lucrative. We made a lot of money out there.
What was once the impassable Arctic now provides the quickest routes for attack from a wide sector of Europe and Asia. Beset by the nightmare of this threat, the American government acted. With the advice of some of the country's best scientists, brought together at MIT's famed Lincoln Laboratories, experimental installations like this one were built and tested in northern Alaska by the Western Electric Company. Guided by the successful tests, the nation's leaders decided on a tremendous undertaking. This was to build, with the cooperation of Canada, a radar early warning line north of the Arctic Circle. Starting at the northernmost tip of Alaska, it would stretch 3,000 miles across the continent to Baffin Island, opposite Greenland. Distant Early Warning Line, they named it. Dew Line, it became.
So I worked that whole summer out there. Cape Romanzoff was just in the Norton Sound, just a little bit south of Nome, right across that sound, and it was right on a point. And that's where they had a great big tower that if we put up this tower that would focus on Russia so they could hear, I guess they watched their TV programs. I don't know what they did with it, but we had this tower anyway. Until we got through that, and I came back to Anchorage. I was going to go back to school, and my buddy said, well, I'm going to Australia, New Zealand, and travel around for a while. He said, why don't you go with me? And being me, I said, okay. So away we went. And we spent about 5 months traveling around Europe and New Zealand, Australia, and Panama, and all that. He's still my buddy. I call him once a week, or he calls me. And we've been friends all from high school. So his uncle lived in Sydney, Australia. So we go down there, and then his uncle took us out and showed us around Australia. Drove us all around, and we spent about a month down there. In fact, I turned 21 down there, and Norman was 20. And this is Norman and I on the beach down there at Bondi Beach in Sydney. We're bathing beauties, or something like that. This one here is Norm and I in our and our girlfriends. These gals were both from Holland, and they were representing Holland at the Summer Olympics in Melbourne. So then they had some kind of a party, we all dressed up and did something there. So we did that, and then we finally decided we were going to go to Europe, so we were going to go through the Suez Canal. Well, that's when the Suez Canal, they had that big 3-day war, or whatever it was.
At the Portsmouth Naval Base, Britain prepares for the worst in the Suez Crisis. Part of her mothball fleet, idle since World War II, is hastily made ready for action. President Nasser continues to defy the Western powers on his seizure of the canal and seeks the support of Russia and the Arab League countries.
I closed the canal, so we had to figure out something else, so we decided on going through the Panama Canal. So we got a one-class ship called the Pharisee. It was an Italian liner. We started out on New Year's morning in 1957. We started out from San Francisco on a one-class ship going to Sydney. And that was quite a trip because it was all one class. Everybody was about the same, wealth, or, they're all from about the same culture and everything. We all got along very well. The Italians had the best food going, so our food was fantastic. And it was a fancy ship. I don't know how we got on it, but we did. And in fact, they wouldn't even let me in the dining room unless I wore a coat and a tie. And so I had to buy one in Honolulu because I didn't have any, so I could at least go in and mingle with the people. Just kind of all mixed together. A lot of New Zealanders and people from Sydney. I met a guy that I still keep in touch with. He was a dentist in Sydney. He was going over to England to practice, and he ended up being a professor of dentistry back in Sydney. And later on in life, I went down and visited him, took my folks down, and we all visited with him and his family. And he's quite a guy. Well, at night we always had a big party upstairs, and they had a bar up there and a swimming pool, and they'd drain the swimming pool at night, and we'd get our friends, we'd all go to the bottom of the pool, we'd drink beer and sing. And finally the captain chased us out of there. He said it's too dangerous, so we couldn't do that. And Norm and I, about 3 o'clock in the morning, we'd go down to the galley and get fresh baked bread. The guys made the bread, and we'd go down and sit in the galleyway in a hallway down there and wait, and they'd bring it out to us. So one night, we'd had a couple of beers, I think, because I'm sitting there reading the ditching instructions in Italian, and I'm chanting them. Attenzione, all this stuff, and Lorman's laughing, and we're carrying on. The next day, we're having breakfast, and we see these people kind of pointing at us and looking at us, and what's going on here? So I asked one of my friends, I said, find out what these people are looking at us for. He came back laughing, he says, they heard that you were saying high mass on the steps at 3 o'clock in the morning down by the bakery. So I said, yeah, we were doing high mass, all right. So we had quite a trip there, and then when we left there, like I say, we went from Sydney to New Zealand, Auckland, and then we went to Tahiti, spent a couple of days there. And then from Tahiti, we went to Panama City, right at the west end of the canal. And then we went through the canal and went through to Cristobal, that's on the other end of the canal. And then we wandered around up to Curacao, and then we went to the Azores. For the Azores, we went to Lisbon, Portugal, and then from Lisbon to Southampton, England. And so we got there, we had met people on the boat that we kept in touch with. So we had people in Sydney, who was the dentist in there. You know, they were living in London, so we visited with them and fooled around with them a little bit. And then we went from there, we ran around England for a couple of weeks, and then we went over took the Golden Express. That's a train that gets on the ferry boat and then gets off the ferry boat and goes into Paris.
Victoria Station, the station we all love, and yet we all leave at some time in our travels abroad. If we're fortunate or just comfort conscious, we leave by Golden Arrow, that 22-carat service which wings us to the continent in all the first-class comfort that Pullman can conjure. And surely conjure is the right word to use in connection with this world-renowned service which daily links the two chief capitals of Europe.
We took that train over to Paris, and there we had an artist that was on our fair seat, and we met this guy, and he put us up on the left bank in Paris, took care of us, got our rooms for us. He even had special restaurants we had to go to, and he told them what to feed us and everything else. It was quite an experience. When he wasn't in town, he'd do this, and we'd wander around, go to Versailles, wander around Paris and all this for, I think we were there for probably almost a month. And then we went up. I had an uncle and an aunt who lived in Wiesbaden, Germany. So we went up to visit them. So we got up there, and we spent some time with them, and they said, well, why don't you go up to Berlin now that you're here? So we caught an airplane and went to Berlin, and spent about a week wandering around Berlin. Went through the Vandenberg Gate, and we had a friend there who we went to high school with, who was in the military. He was a officer in the Air Force, and so he took us around, showed us all that stuff. We rode around in the car with him, and so we had things going pretty good. We usually had somebody we knew or could find. So then we came back, we went back, we ended back in England and went to England a little bit more. Then we caught the Queen Mary out of Southampton, went from the Queen Mary to New York. And on the Queen Mary, it was quite interesting because we were about running out of money, and so we bought a ticket. So we stayed there. That was about a 5-day trip going across there. And we got to New York. We found out we didn't have quite enough money to get a ticket to fly home out to Anchorage. So we ran into a guy at the airport who we also knew from Anchorage. So he set us up in a cheap hotel until we could get some money sent down. So Norman got some money from his mother, and it took a day to get that, so we had an extra day hotel expenses. So by the time we paid up everything and went to the airport, we found out we were $20 short for our ticket, for Norman's ticket to go to Anchorage. So we're standing there trying to figure out how are we going to do this. So Norman saw a guy standing there with a gun. He was carrying a big rifle, so he knew he was a hunter, and he knew he was going to Anchorage. So he went over and talked to him, because Norman's a real salesman. He was a vice president of French's mustard company. He could sell anything to anybody. He could sell mustard to anybody. So he goes up and talks to this guy, and he ends up borrowing $20 from him. He found out the guy was the police chief from Rochester, New York, and he was going hunting out of Anchorage. And so Norman talked him into giving him the money that he needed, and he gave the guy his driver's license to make sure he could do it. And then his mother paid the guy when he got to Anchorage. So that's the way we got home. We didn't have much money left. So we just barely made it. Yeah, so we had a lot of fun on that trip. I had pictures of that where we crossed the equator. We put on a big show. You know, we had the doctor. I think I was the doctor. We had a whole bunch of different characters, and we put on kind of a skit and play on the boat. We were doing some kind of a ritual on him. I guess he lived, I don't know. So we had a lot of stuff going on. And when we get to port, we all take off. The ones that kind of hang around together, we'd all take off and go someplace. And so it was kind of fun.